pretty simple. It's pretty logical. If a construct was made and it places those that are classified as white at the top and those that are classified as black as the bottom, and you are a partner, now follow me on this. The American Anthropological Association also states this: you don't get the mortgage or the loan or the job because you say you're black, and that there is a set of social attachments to that label. You don't get the mortgage or the job or the loan because they say you're black, and they have attached these negatives to that label. That is the real issue. If we said to the average American or the average European, are you an American? Or what is an American? And then grabbed one from the 1930s and said, what is an American? You would get two different answers. You get two different responses, because the term America is very general. Because Mexicans are Americans. Chileans are Americans. Argentinians and Canadians are Americans. This is just the truth. See, there's, the scope of education is narrowed for a lot of us over the past 50 years, 60 years. You see what I'm saying? All you got to do is look up Monroe Doctrine, and you see all about it. Look up the Monroe Doctrine. And what is Monroe Doctrine? Is basically talking about the unity of American states. American states, or a state, does not necessarily mean a domestic state of the 50 states of the Union. A state is a nation. That's what it is. So when we say state, we're talking about state in international law, right? So Mexico is an American state. Chile is an American state. And Monroe Doctrine basically talks about all for one in terms of American states. That's what it is. You have organizations like the Organization of American States, right? The Pan-American Union. So when we say America from that perspective, we're talking about American soil. A nation is a political unit. That's all it is. A nation is not a group of people that are just occupying a particular place. That's not what a nation is. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. A nation is a political unit. That's what it is. That's why Mexico is an American state. It's an American state because it's a state or a political unit on American soil. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So first we have to broaden the scope and to get a greater understanding of what the term American is, or the possibilities of what it could be. Now, the reason why we say a lot of times we have a narrow scope of American now is because of the European. The European, especially during the 20s, the early and the mid 20s, right, exercised an inordinate amount of control over the other American states and began to redefine America as talking about the 50 states of the Union. You see what I'm saying? As a matter of fact, a very significant conference dealing with this was the 6th Pan-American Conference on Private International Law in January through February 20th of 1928. This was one of the hot topics spoken about during that time period, was how the U.S. had a one-sided understanding of Monroe Doctrine. You see what I'm saying? Where it was basically trying to redefine what American was in favor of the United States over the other American states. And we have, over time, adopted that very same understanding. And so naturally, we'll be like, nah, I don't know, if that's what American is, I don't want to be that. It just makes sense. But that's come from a lack of proper or fuller understanding of what America is. You can't tell the people in Peru that they're not Americans. Yes, sir. You can't tell them that they're not Americans because they know they are. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Yes, sir. So, in our doctrine, in our questionnaire, the prophet said, what is his nationality? Moorish American. What is your nationality? Descendants of Moroccans and born in America. Right? Mm-hmm. So, right off, just on the surface, you see it. He says, descendants of Moroccans, when we're talking about politically, not racially necessarily, politically, because there's no other people outside of us on the planet that are identified by their ethnicity or their skin tone. Go to Mexico and you see people that are of like straight up and down European stock almost, Spanish. Then you have the Chiapas that are darker than this brother, right? But what do they identify themselves as? Mexican, right? Go to the Philippines, same thing. Go anywhere else, it's the same thing. Only here are we identified in another way, or we identify ourselves in another way, or we allow people to identify ourselves in another way, and we accept it. So when we say we're descendants of Moroccans born in America, what are we talking about? Real simple. I'll make it real simple. During the transatlantic slave period, right? The majority of the people were stolen, as the story goes, from Northwest and West Continental Africa, right? Who controlled North and Northwest Africa, the continent, that part of the continent, during that time period? A political entity called the Moroccan Empire. That's just basic history. So politically, who did we belong to? What nation did we belong to before we were called or reclassified Negro, Black, and Colored by somebody else? You see my point?
Yeah.
And that's the only reason we say. That's why we say that. Because if no other if for nothing else, how does the rest of the world come together? Right? The Arabs and the Palestinians, in our neighborhoods, the Koreans, they handle the that corner of the market on hair care products for our people. What's the one thing that brings them together? The fact they're Korean. The fact that they're Palestinian. That's what brings the whole world together. Is that one thing? You see what I'm saying? So go ahead.
What do you say to those who say we are not Moors? Our people didn't call themselves Moors in history. That was a name given to us by our conqueror. The European, the white man, called us Moors because the term Moor simply meant black.
Right.
What do you say to that?
Well, first, that's narrow, and some of that is incorrect.
Okay.
The slave master per se did not classify us as Moors. The term Moor or Moorish, as it relates to our ancestors, has two meanings. One is a general meaning. One's a more specific meaning. Okay? The more specific meaning has to do with a political, like I said before, a political community. A political community. For instance, the entity Mexico is a political community. It's not a race. It's a political community. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So, from 6th century on, for a little over 700 years, you had a political community that controlled North Africa, West Africa, some parts of the interior continental Africa, and controlled parts of the eastern seaboard in the Caribbean and the United States. This is actual fact history. That entity was called the Moroccan Empire, and anybody under the political influence of that body, right, are classified in the diaspora as what? Moors. Those were Tuareg, Berber, people from from the Mali kingdom of Mali. These were all lands that at one point in time were governed more or less by the Moroccan Empire during that time period. So to the rest of the world, what would they be called? You see what I'm saying?
Moors.
There you go. Does that take away from their tribal influence or their tribal identity? Not at all. Not at all. Because an empire encompasses many lands. It encompasses, right? There you, right. This makes sense to us when the Europeans didn't call the Roman Empire, right? That makes sense. But, when we talk about an empire that was run by us, then it's like, wait a minute, now it gets funny. You see what I'm saying? Now the other thing with Moors, generally, right? When the rest of the world, when you come and bring mathematics, science, running water, libraries to the rest of the world and bring them out of the dark ages, and all they see is you and they associate you with intelligence, and you don't look like them, of course they're going to associate the name. There you go.
I got you. Beautiful. I like the way you put it.
See what I'm saying? It's just that simple. Now here we go. I'm going to use this analogy, brother. You're a head of a household. I'm a father as well, right? Who sets the rules in the house? The head of the household. Father, mother, whoever's the head of the household sets the rules, right? You set the rules of the house. You mandate that everybody follows the rules. When they follow the rules, there's peace in the household. But now you wake up one morning and you decide, either you decide or you just forget the rules, or you decide you ain't gonna follow the rules no more. What happens to the house? It's chaos, right? But even more so, the people that listened to you before not only no longer listen to you, but have no respect for you. Why? Because you were charged with setting the rules and you no longer obey the rules you set. Now, when you look at the laws of nations, when you look at the world today, and how the world conducts business today, no group of people are identified or recognized without being connected to a nation. This is just a fact. Now, that being said, what people taught the world civilization? Who? We did, right? So, can you imagine how the world looks at you now when you refuse to follow the very same rules you set for the world? When you refuse to identify yourself with your nation, with your forefathers, and you dishonor them in name and principle, and cling to names and principles that delude to slavery? Look at how the world looks at you now. If we are the great people that we claim ourselves to be, one thing that great people do is great people have the power to look at themselves and find a solution for their issues with themselves, because if the great people are in a bad predicament, it's usually why? Because they put themselves in that predicament.
You are listening to John Henry Drums, home of the Melanated Mind Matters University.